It's another month, so let's go back and look at all the movies and TV shows that I watched in the month of October, spooky month. This is my first end of month video that I've done in a while now. I took a bit of a break, but I'm back. So the first film that I watched last month was Speak No Evil, the remake. I watched the original the month before, and I thought it was just a really well-paced horror. That works so well because of how increasingly uncomfortable and dreadful it becomes, and it just leads to an amazingly devastating ending that worked really well with the tone that had set up all movie. This remake has a slightly different tone. It's more awkwardly comedic than the original, and it feels very welcome in my opinion, since I didn't really want a shot-for-shot remake of the original. It kind of complements the original in a weird way, and James McAvoy is an amazing standout for me. His performance is just amazingly insane, and I prefer his character more over the originals. I do think it does suffer from some pacing issues compared to the original, and it's probably maybe too goofy during that final act, but overall it's a very solid remake. I give it an 8.5. Then I watched Strange Darling. I thought this film started off a bit odd, and I didn't really like the non-chronological presentation at first, but as the film went on, it kind of felt like it was treating the audience as a detective, slowly putting all these parts together until every jigsaw piece falls into place, and it just makes for a really intriguing final act. The visuals for this film are just amazing. It's probably one of the best graded films I've seen all year, and I know everybody has complained about it widely announcing at the start that it was filmed in 35mm, but it does really look good though. Willa Fitzgerald is really great in the main role. She just does an amazing performance, and you really feel her calculating and planning things in her head in real time during some of these scenes. Again, this is probably another film that I've given 8.5. And then we're getting on to some classics here. I watched The Shining for the first time. I watched the American cut of this film, which is like 20 minutes longer than the international version. People have said that the international cut is better, it's just paced better, but I want to watch the longest cut first. This film is just so unbelievably iconic and influential that I can't give it anything less than a 10. The performances from everyone in here are just so good. The big standout obviously being Jack Nicholson, whose descent into madness is just so great, and it's like this hotel is slowly luring him in and controlling him. There's some generally creepy imagery in here, which is made even creepier by the insane soundtrack, which elevates basically every single scene in here. The cinematography is amazing in here as well. There's just so many beautiful shots that feel like they inspired basically every A24 film. It's just so ingrained into pop culture. I've also watched the Simpsons parody of this years ago as well, The Shining from Treehouse of Horror, and I was laughing at a few parts in here that reminded me of that episode. But yeah, it's iconic. It's so iconic. And then I watched Doctor Sleep, the sequel. I watched the 3-hour director's cut of this film, and I thought it actually kind of earned that runtime. I think it does a really great job at continuing the events of The Shining, and obviously Danny's story in particular, and instead of continuing the atmospheric dread and tension of the first film, it instead decides to turn the supernatural aspect of this film up to 11 and have these villains who like vape little children and this child who is like the universe's chosen one, and it's just so fun. At the centre of it all, there's some really great commentary and themes on death and the afterlife, and Danny's character is just really greatly developed here and amazingly acted by Ian McGregor. I do think there were way too many excessive callbacks to the original in the third act, but overall it's just a very solid sequel. I give it an 8. And then I watched The Thing. This is another classic that I haven't seen, and it's just another one of those films where the iconicness, that's not a word, but like how influential it was, it just elevates the film a lot for me. Obviously the elephant in the room when it comes to this film is the practical effects, and they still really hold up today, and they just look so gross and unsettling. There's so much great tension in this film as well, and you're just waiting for things to go downhill with this group of people. I do think there were a few odd editing choices here and there, like at the end of some scenes it freeze frames and face to black, and it just took me out of the film a little bit. It just felt a bit weird to edit the film like that. Apart from that, it's just an expertly done horror. I don't have much else to say. I give it a 9. And then I watched the 2011 prequel. This just didn't do anything for me, and even though it's a prequel, so many things about this film are just rehashing the original and don't really have that many interesting additions. The idea, I think, from the studio to make a follow-up to a film with the best practical effects of all time and then replace the practical effects created for the film film with CGI, it's just really infuriating. There are some cool moments at the end where they are trying to connect it to the start of the original, but it just kind of felt a bit rushed. Like they were literally playing the end scene of the film over the credits. It's just a pretty nothing film, in my opinion. I give it a 5.5. And then I watched Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. This is a 2022 film that I missed out on, and overall it's a very fun time. I really like more comedic meta whodunits like Scream, and this film is a really good addition. Most of this film is just a bunch of rich, stupid people running around the house and screaming at each other, and it's so fun again. The element of the Storm House Party is a really creative story device to get all of these characters together, and when things get progressively worse and worse for these characters, it's like watching a car crash in slow motion, and I loved it. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Jennifer's Body. I watched the director's cut of this, which includes the guy who voices Patrick saying he's gonna nail Megan Fox's character's balls to his door. This is an extremely 2000s horror comedy that has a uniquely 2000s charm to it. It's auto-corrected Megan Fox's name on it to Vegan Fox when I was writing this down. Megan Fox is just so great in her at playing this hot friend to the main character at the start of the film, and then morphing into this like evil, horrible character later on. It can get goofy and cheesy in moments, but it just kind of adds to the charm of the film. It's just a great time overall. I give it an 8. And then I watched the VVitch. There's a really unique period piece that has this really great increasing sense of dread. The acting here is just really great, and every character in here has like different fearful reactions to everything going on, and all these characters in the family are just fleshed out really well. I really like the old worldy dialogue of this film as well, and how it kind of adds to this period setting, along with a really bleak colour grading. There's some really creepy moments in here as well that work so well due to the sound design and the cinematography, and it just feels like one of those films where I could rewatch it and get something new out of it each time. So I appreciate that. I give it a 9. And then I watched Beetlejuice. I actually kind of found this to be on the same level as the original, which was a surprise for me. I watched the original earlier this year and I really enjoyed it, and this film brought that same wackiness and weirdness. I like it builds out the world of this afterlife even more, and there's so many great visual gags that are just elevated due to the really great practical effects, which were a big standout from the first film. The new characters introduced into here are great as well, most prominently Jenna Ortega's character, who has a really fun character arc in here. They also managed to kill off a pretty major character from the last film, whose actor is a little bit problematic right now, to say the least, and they managed to turn that into a really funny subplot. Yeah, I give it an 8.5. And then I watched The Lighthouse. This is another very interesting film from Robert Eggers, the same director who did The VVitch, and I just really appreciate it for how abstract it was in its visuals and its messaging. First of all, I think the two lead performances from Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson in here are just insanely good, and there's just so much range in their performances in here. I do think it was a bit of style over substance in the first half, and it did drag a bit in my opinion, but the visuals were just amazing, and the square aspect ratio really won me over in the end, even though I did find it a little bit distracting at the start. The second half worked really well for me, and it was morbidly satisfying watching these characters like slowly fall into insanity, and it's also just conveyed really well through some really creepy visuals. It's just so unlike any film that I've seen before, and I can't help but appreciate it because of that. I give it a 9. And then I watched Us. This is the only Jordan Peele film that I had not seen before, and I definitely found it to be his weakest, but it's still pretty good. I like the concept overall and where it went, and there's a lot of really good comedic moments that Jordan Peele likes to insert here and there into his films. But there were some plot holes and things that don't make too much sense if you think about them too much, and it did kind of frustrate me a bit in the third act. Again though, as I've said with other films in this video, I like films that encourage you to rewatch them and get something new out of them each time, and this film just feels like one of those films where I can watch it from another character's perspective and just get something completely new from it. So overall, I respect it. I give it an 8. And then I watched Transformers 1. I watched this in cinemas with my brother. It's the first non-horror film that I watched in the month, and I mainly watched it because of this guy on Twitter, TF Hype Guy, who would non-stop waffle about how good this film was and how he wanted it to do good in the box office. And he wasn't wrong. It's really good. It's definitely the best Transformers film that I've seen. First of all, the voice acting is just top tier from Chris Hemsworth and Brian Tyrese Henry, and you really feel the friendship between these two characters and the eventual rivalry they have at the end of the film just through the voice performances. I like how they kind of change their voice to sound more like how they do in the other films as the film goes on as well. The story is just so investing, and that third act is just like borderline perfect in my opinion. I just got goosebumps from like everything that was going on screen. I do think some characters, especially Bumblebee, can get a bit obnoxious, and I kind of felt like the first act of the film was borrowing a bit from other animated films. Like the race at the start reminded me a bit of the race at the end of Wreck-It Ralph, but apart from that, it's a bit of a masterpiece, you know. I give it a 9. And then I watched I Know What You Did Last Summer. This wasn't amazing. I thought there were some fun slasher moments in here, and it has a 90s charm to it, but it gets way too much in some points. Everyone apart from the main characters have like 0 brain cells, and it became extremely frustrating in the final act. Also, the killer in here was built up to be like this massive urban legend with a hook for a hand, and I felt like they could have done something like really interesting with that, but instead he just turns out to be a random fisherman who I guess just likes killing people. It just felt very anticlimactic in my opinion, and I couldn't care less. I give it a 5.5. And then I watched Scary Movie. I watched this straight after because I know it takes the piss out of I Know What You Did Last Summer, as well as Scream and Scream 2, and overall I think it did that really well. There's so many clever gags in here that had me laughing out loud at how it poked fun at the meta nature of Scream and the stupidity of I Know What You Did Last Summer. I do think there were some really poorly aged jokes in here that just kind of felt awkward to watch today, and there's also way too many sex jokes that went way too far in some moments. But overall it's just a really solid parody. It's nowhere near the likes of something like Airplane or Monty Python, but it's just really fun nonetheless. I give it a 6. And then I watched Alien Romulus. This works so well as a sequel to that original Alien that I almost forgot the other ones existed. There's just so much great world building in here for this like future world with all these different gadgets and cities. I just thought there's so many unique ideas and set pieces in here that confused me as to why they haven't been thought of before, like the facehuggers only being able to see with temperature and then warming the temperature of the ship up to match the human's body temperatures. There's some really disturbing scenes as well that work so well because of the acting. Like the chestburster scene is probably the most intense of the whole series. The third act just goes to absolutely insane territory with something to do with a pregnant woman that I don't want to give too much away about, but I really loved it. I gave it an 8.5. And then I watched It's What's Inside. This is a very interesting body swap film that had so many twists and turns that got me excited. I'm not gonna lie, the main characters aren't all that likeable, and I couldn't for the life of me remember who was who, which you would imagine made it especially hard when one character was in another character's body. But I think the concept and overall story really carried this film to being amazing. The editing is just a massive standout as well. I felt like the editor just knew when to cut and when to hold on a character, and there's some really fun split screen stuff in here that help convey each character's emotions. It's just overall a really great sci-fi comedy. I give it an 8. And then I finished watching Game of Thrones season 7. For reference, I watched the last 6 seasons over the past few months, and I really love them all really. Season 4 is my favourite. It's like a 10 out of 10 season, and season 5 was my least favourite. I give it like an 8.5 though, so it's still really solid. I thought the first half of this season was pretty solid, and I did feel like for some characters like Cersei, they were written slightly off compared to last season's. But overall, it was great, and I found the 4th episode to be literally a perfect episode. Like, that final act was, oh my god, that was amazing. Most of the problems lie in the second half, where I felt like things were moving way too quickly. People were just like fast travelling, as a lot of people have pointed out, and there's just some side plots in here that just felt pointless and just had me rolling my eyes, especially that Sansa and Arya beef. I do think the finale kind of saved the season overall. I think that was a solid episode, and that final scene has probably some of the coolest imagery I've seen on a TV show ever. So yeah, I give it an 8. And then I watched The Substance. This was a film that was just hyped up so much everywhere, especially the last 30 minutes and how crazy it was, and it actually did live up to that hype. This film is just a body horror masterpiece, possibly even better than The Thing in my opinion. Demi Moore just puts in an amazing performance, and you really feel for her as she's being pushed out of the entertainment industry for being too old. Then of course the opportunity comes up to try this new dodgy drug that makes her younger, and then everything goes downhill from there. I do think the editing is amazing in some moments and really puts you in the shoes of this main character, but some moments I do think can spell things out a little bit too clearly. Like there's some moments where something is revealed and I already get it, but then it ends up doing a flashback to like really hammer it in, and I think it is maybe a little bit too much sometimes, but really that's my only complaint. And the film is just worth watching for that final scene alone. It needs to be seen to believed. It's in my top 3 of the year so far. It's so good. I give it a 9.5. And then watched The World Robot. This is a DreamWorks film that had a lot of buzz around it, and I overall find it to be one of their best. There's some insanely good animation in here, which is possibly even better than the latest Puss in Boots. It just takes you into this beautiful, futuristic, but also like natureful world. Is that a word? I do think the humans in here look a bit weird, but they have like a minute of screen time, so it's okay. I just think the story of this robot who has this responsibility put upon them to take care of this bird is just really heartwarming, and there's just some really beautiful moments in here involving those two characters. There's just a lot of great side characters in here as well, like the fox played by Pedro Pascal, who helps the robot to mother this child, and also the bear voiced by Mark Hamill, who heard a little bit of skips in. Yeah, I give it a 9. And then I finished watching Game of Thrones Season 8, possibly the most hated season of television ever. This definitely is a season of television. I didn't think it was as bad as people are saying, to be honest. I thought the first half was actually alright for the most part, even though it suffered from that teleportation problem again, and it did feel very rushed overall. But all the stuff with the White Walkers and that whole battle was just really cool. And then the second half happened. I think people are a bit too harsh with episode 4. Like, it's not a very eventful episode, but there is some nice little moments between characters, and it ends in an intriguing way, I guess. But they completely mess it up in episode 5. Daenerys' character had like another season's worth of character development off screen, it seemed like, and just decided to kill millions of innocent people for just no reason, just to anger Cersei, I guess. And don't even get me started on the main character deaths in that episode. Jaime, Cersei, and also Varys, like, did not deserve to go out the way they did. The final episode I did find to be a slight improvement. It did end the Stark's arcs in a decent way. Bran maybe a bit less so, with him becoming king and all that. But I just felt the writers were just trying to rush to this conclusion instead of just giving it some breathing time, like giving it an extra few episodes or another season. Like, I felt like it needed another season. If it had another season to like flesh all of these arcs out a bit more and like have Daenerys' downfall be a little bit more slower, then I think the ending could have worked much better. It still wouldn't be like a top tier ending, but like it would have worked better. But as this stands, it's not a great last 2 episodes, and it's just like the weakest of the show by far. I give it a 6. And then I watched Saw 3. I watched the last 2 Saw films and Saw X last year, and overall I really enjoyed all of them, and I feel the same way about this film as well. Like, I watched the director's cut of this film, by the way, which is like 10 minutes longer. I think the big problem that I had with the last installment of this franchise, Saw 2, was the editing, which got way too much at some points, and I feel like this film kind of toned it down a little bit, except for the third act, where it felt the need to flash back to scenes that happened like 2 minutes ago. I like how it focused on John and Amanda's relationship in this film, which it did a bit of in Saw X as well. But this film shows all these flashbacks and how John kind of took her under his wing and made her his disciple almost. And I found that aspect really interesting. It's also a Saw film, so you're getting some really creative traps in here that would link really well to like the main plot of the film. I personally find it to be on the same level as like the second film. I give it a 7. And then I watched Terrifier. This is a pretty decent low budget slasher. To be honest, Art the Clown did carry most of this film though. The acting here is not amazing. The 2 main characters don't even survive the halfway point of the movie, and there was this really weird subplot with this crazy woman and her dolls that kind of just went nowhere. There is some really great kills in here though. There are some really good practical effects for the most part, and there's just so many creepy moments with Art. Like, he's just a great horror villain who's played really well by David Howard Thornton. He might be up there by like some of the greats like Jason and Michael Myers. But yeah, this film, I give it a 6. And then I watched Woman of the Hour. I found this to be a pretty average biopic and a decent directorial debut from Anna Kendrick. It reminded me a bit of the Dharma Show on Netflix, where a lot of things are like over dramatized and expanded upon to where it feels a bit unnecessary. I feel like it could have worked a bit better as a short or an episode of an anthology TV show, because all the stuff on the dating game show is really interesting. I actually heard about the story before going into the film, and how like a mass murderer managed to wriggle his way onto this game show and almost kill another woman. I think that's some really good commentary on like misogyny in the 70s towards women, especially in the entertainment industry, and how women just weren't treated seriously a lot of the time. time. I just think everything else going on, though, is just not really that interesting. The killer's other victims are just not focused on enough for me to care about what happened before they were murdered. And the killer himself, I feel like, is focused on a little bit too much. I feel like Anna Kendrick, as a director, was trying to get into the killer's mind and find out what makes him want to kill these women. But I just don't think it went far enough, in my opinion, if it was trying to go in that direction. I gave it a 7.5. And then I watched Game of Thrones The Last Watch. This was a really interesting look into the filming process of season 8 of Game of Thrones, seeing where things were filmed and how sets were made. To be honest, I didn't expect the whole operation to be as small as it was for a show as like massive as Game of Thrones. I do kind of wish they focused on the post-production process, like the editing and the CGI, but apart from that, it's just a really solid documentary. Yeah, I give it an 8. And then I watched Terrifier 2. The sequel is way too long, and scenes go on and on to the point of boredom in some instances, but you can really feel the passion in this film and like the strive to make art one of the most deranged and insane killers in film, and I think they achieve that. There's so many insane and gross practical effects in it, and some kills that go so far to the point of absurdity, and I just can't help but find them funny, which I think the director Damien Leone was trying to go for. There's actually a character in here to root for this time as well, in the form of Sienna, who I thought was a really solid character for the most part. I also really like the introduction of the supernatural elements into the franchise and bringing back the woman with the disfigured face in a weird but creative way. I appreciate it. I give it 7.5. And then straight after, I watched Terrifier 3. This is by far my favourite in the franchise, I think. If the last film had supernatural elements, then this film turns those elements up to 11, especially in that final act. This is just insanely fun. The pacing is also way better than the last film. I think the Christmas setting just comes with so many creative seasonal based kills from art that are, again, really fun. I'm not usually that bothered by gore in movies, but there were some kills in here that had me squirming. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a kill in there that has something to do with rats and a tube, and you can tell everybody in this film has had like some acting lessons or something in between the last film and this film, because the acting is significantly better compared to the last two films, in my opinion. And as a result, I really found myself more invested in Sienna's trauma from what she went through and how she can't escape art. I really loved it. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Saw 4. I'm continuing watching the Saw films now. This is the first film after like the original trilogy, and it's a massive step down in my opinion. I think the main problem is the writers are clearly struggling after killing off the main villain of their franchise, so they're really struggling to try and tie in these brand new plot threads and everything through flashbacks now. And there were some flashbacks involved with John Kramer that I liked, like how he was before his son died in the car accident, but there's just some other stuff that I really don't care about that much, especially with John's wife, who has this like really confusing on and off relationship with him. The traps were alright in this film, but none of them feel like really iconic or memorable, maybe except for the ice block one with Donnie Wahlberg's character. I thought the reveal at the end with the character of Hoffman, I just couldn't care less about that as well. It's overall an alright Saw sequel, but it's just probably the franchise's least interesting of the ones I've seen. I give it a 5.5. And then I watched Saw 5. This one gives Hoffman the full spotlight here, and he's just not a really well written character at all, not in this film anyway, and they just convolute everything and tried to make it seem like Hoffman was part of all the traps from the start. I couldn't help but enjoy how the writers struggled to try and tie all this stuff in. Sham is an alright character, and it's pretty fun seeing this like cat and mouse chase between the two, leading to this pretty good final scene. But overall, it's just significantly lacking Jigsaw, and yeah, it's mid. I give it a 5. And then I watched Saw 6. This actually shocked me with how good it was. The writing is just so much better in here, along with the direction. I just felt like the editing and tone of this film works so well and just feels so much less sloppy than the editing of the films that have come before this. The traps in here are just all iconic and memorable in my opinion as well. Something that I really wanted from the last two films, and actually care about Hoffman now. His character is focused on just the right amount in this film, I feel like. At least some extremely tense moments involving his character. The flashbacks actually managed to save themselves with this film and have a pretty good tie-in for everything dating all the way back to Saw 3. They've also got Roderick in here, so I'm gonna have to bump it up a few points. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Piece by Piece. This is basically a semi-documentary slash biopic on Pharrell Williams' life, told through Lego, and I just found it to be super interesting. Pharrell is just a legend, and I'm confused how he is over 50 years old and still looks like this. He's just a legendary producer, and he's done some of like the best hip hop and pop songs, and I was really interested in seeing how he got to that place, and it really shows that rise really interestingly in Lego form. I do think it started to ramp up a bit too much in the final acts, and I wanted to see more of his work with Kendrick and Daft Punk, but overall it's a very solid film on Pharrell's life, and for some reason it's not getting enough attention, which is upsetting. It really deserves more attention. It's a really good film. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Hereditary. This is another one of those films where it's just so unbelievably iconic in the horror scene, and it really put psychological horror on the map, really. I've seen so many scenes and moments from this film before actually watching it that I knew what was coming, but it still managed to creep me out and make me uncomfortable in so many ways. I think it deals with the themes of death and grieving in really interesting and kind of realistic ways as well, and Toni Collette's performance in here really just sells that grief. I've seen Ari Aster's most recent film, Beau is Afraid, and he's just so good at creating this feeling of dread that slowly increases as the film goes on, and it's the same with this film as more supernatural elements get introduced. I do really love how this film kind of does like silent jump scares where something's in the background or just off to the side and you don't notice it for a few seconds, and then you realise, why are they holding on the shot for so long? And then you finally see it, and yeah, it's just such an effective way of doing jump scares. It doesn't feel cheap at all. I really just love how it culminates into this just absolutely insane final act with these supernatural old cult members who worship Satan. Again, it has to be seen to believed, and I just love it for that. I give it a 10. And then I watched Ari Aster's follow-up, Midsommar. I'm shocked to find out that these came out like a year between each other. I don't think it's as good as Hereditary, but it's still really good. Florence Pugh's performance in here is so great, and I love how the visuals are used in here, especially when people are on drugs and all the flowers are like breathing. It's really like unsettling, but also like really cool. I also love how Aster sets this film in like a wide open field, but manages to make it more and more claustrophobic and inescapable as the film progresses, and these people become like more and more sinister. It goes some insane directions, and that final act I feel maybe gets a bit too lost in its own source, if you know what I mean. There's just a lot of moments that go on, and it kind of loses the disturbing nature of everything when all the mystery is taken away. Again though, Ari Aster just knows how to make a proper disturbing, increasingly like dreadful, like horrible film, but in a good way. I give it an 8.5. And then the last film that I decided to watch last month, the big Halloween watch, was Oddity. This is a really solid supernatural horror that I wasn't even expecting Gwilym Lee to be in, who obviously plays Brian May in Bohemian Rhapsody. He plays like the main role in this film, and he's really good in it. There's some really good suspenseful moments in here, and the story overall is just really interesting. I do think this film is kind of the opposite of Ari Aster films when it comes to the jump scares, where this film opts for like some like proper cheap, like loud jump scares with like the boom sound effects and something appearing out of nowhere, and I don't really think it fit the tone of the film in my opinion. Like, I do think some of those jump scares work well in some films, and they work with the tone like a lot of James Wan films. His films are just super goofy, and like when a jump scare like that happens, it makes sense. Those kind of jump scares just didn't really fit the tone of this film. This film felt more like meditative, if that makes sense, and more like slow paced. But yeah, I really love this film overall. I think the third act is really fun. You get to see like all the characters you want to see get their comeuppance at the end, get their comeuppance, and it's just super satisfying. Yeah, I really loved it. Give it an 8.5. Yeah, so that is all the films and TV shows that I watched in the month of October. I'm currently watching the Graham Norton Show. I used to watch this all the time with my parents, but I recently decided to return to it, especially that now I'm really into films and TV, and it's just really interesting hearing like actors' stories and gossip on movies. It's just also a really great concept for a chat show where you've got 4 celebrities on a sofa and you just make them talk to one another. That does mean sometimes it can lead to some very awkward chemistry, but there's a lot of instances where it's just comedy gold. I'm also watching The Penguin. This show is just so unbelievably good so far, and it manages to continue the story of the Batman in such an interesting way, whilst also being something completely different. The Batman was like a through and through superhero movie really, but this show is just a straight up crime thriller that has these amazing twists and turns that are written so well. Colin Farrell is just still absolutely unrecognisable in that makeup as well, and he just completely transforms into the role of Oswald Cobblepot. I love it. So yeah, if you like this video, please leave a like. If you didn't, please leave a dislike, and I'll see you in the next video.